Hello, welcome in. This is going to be the big offseason recap episode for Alabama basketball. This is something I've been meaning to do, just kind of been waiting on one or two roster spots to get finalized. Don't have enough time to really get into every single thing in the offseason as it goes. I'm a full time student, I work a full time job. This is a side thing, but I'm glad to be finally getting into this. So, without any further ado, let's just get this thing kicked off. Just first of all, with a rundown of the roster. Uh, Not necessarily positions, because positions in the NATO's offense, the traditional 1 through 5, is less and less meaningful every single year. It's more so just kind of what archetype a player fits into. So, without further ado, this is kind of how I have these listed out in a sense. And so, I have them as far as our small guards. We have one combo guard. We've got a handful of big guards. We got a couple of tweeners, and then we've got our three true bigs. So, starting with the small guards, Javon Quinterly and Mark Sears both returning. Javon Quinterly is a graduate at 6'1. Mark Sears is a senior at 6'1. Both guys, veteran guards, have been doing this for a while. As far as guys that can run the show, you couldn't have asked for more than to retain these two guys. Javon Quinterly was one of those that there was a bit of smoke at the end. Trilly Donovan tweeted out he may be hitting the portal. His brother hit the portal, but he returns, and you couldn't ask for more than a 6-year senior in Javon Quinterly and a true senior in Mark Sears that are really leading your backcourt as the returners. And then as our combo guard, we've got Latrell Wrightsell Jr. He's a 6'3 senior, a transfer from Cal State Fullerton. We'll dive more into him later. And then for our bigger guards, we've got Aaron Estrada, who is another transfer. He's a graduate from Hofstra. He's in his last year of eligibility. Rylan Griffin, who has undergone a growth spurt this offseason. Per Henry Barrera, our strength and conditioning coach, he's grown an inch and a half this summer. He was listed at 6'5 this year, so he's looking in that 6'6 to 6'7 range. He is the only true sophomore on this roster, interestingly enough. And then behind him are Davin Cosby and Chris Parker. Davin Cosby, he is a 6'5" redshirt freshman. He was a midseason enrollee, took a redshirt last year, so he's kind of in that in between. Listing him as a redshirt really isn't entirely fair. He's not like two full years into the program. He's really kind of a year and a half in. These reclass guys are a bit weird, but he will be listed as a redshirt freshman. And then Chris Parker, who is a true freshman at 6'6", he's a bit of a kind of wing, but he's got guard skills. He's another really interesting player, a guy that you know fits that Nate Oates mold of kind of a dynamic, potential dynamic scorer that's got the size to kind of slide really everywhere on the court. And he's listed as a small forward by some sites, a shooting guard by others. He, insists that he's a point guard. It's one of those things that he's a big guy with guard skills, and that's what matters more than anything. And then as far as the tweeners, a pair of true freshmen in Sam Walters and Mohamed Diubate. Sam Walters at 6'8", Mo Diubate at 6'7". Already, injury bug has bit Alabama. Mo Diabate posted a picture on his Instagram story and a big brace on his leg. Word out of the program is that it is a meniscus issue. He's expected to be good by season start, but for the sake of this, he's out right now. He's going to miss most, if not all, of off-season workouts. Treat things as if they're the worst and then hope for the best. That's the approach that I'm going to kind of take in regards to looking over this roster, looking over the potential for who's going to produce early, who can produce late, and kind of just the general consensus of where things are at. Sam Walters, he was a guy that he was a top 50-ish recruit, is where he finished in the composite by a lot of places. He's a guy that I kind of beat the drum on online or on some message boards that he's a guy that I had as a top 40 player in this class. His one and only concern is his frame. He's a skinny, twig, little string bean guy, and I'm not saying that as an insult. I'm a skinny little twig string bean guy, but he's 6'8" and just skinny as the day is long. But he's put on weight over a senior year of high school. He's in the strength and conditioning program here at Alabama now. He's got a whole summer to really try and get his body capable of playing in the SEC. Obviously, he's not going to be this big, bulky dude. That's never going to happen. But that's not what the NATO system is after. That's not what the NBA is after. That's not what basketball is after anymore. He's just got to have enough functional strength. And I do believe that he really could early on have enough functional strength because his legs have enough size to them. In basketball, like obviously upper body strength is something that's nice. You want to have it. It helps kind of create, those little push offs that don't get called, helps you get a little space coming off of ball screens, moving off of actions. But what matters more than anything is, are your legs and your core strong enough whenever you're getting back down in the post? It doesn't matter how strong your arms are in that scenario. It's, can you take the shot off the chest, and can your legs hold up? And that's what matters. Can you get up in the 40th minute of a game? Are your legs giving out? That's what matters more than anything. And I think that Sam Walters is closer to being ready than he isn't. And I think that's a big part of why he wasn't where I think he should have been in regards to these rankings, is because people were just kind of scared of the frame. I can't blame them. It happens all the time where dudes have all the tools and they just aren't ready for a year or two. But I think that Sam Walters is a guy that will surprise people with how ready he is. Um, as far as like the other true freshmen, Chris Parker and Mo Diabate are the only other true freshman signees at this point. I'll get into the other one in a minute. Uh, Mo Diabate was a fringe top 100 guy. Chris Parker was really all over the place in regards to his rankings. Chris Parker was a guy that was ranked as high as like the 40s or the 50s by ESPN and Rivals, and then 24/7 had him unranked. He's an interesting case study and a guy that was at the top of the class, 5-star early, physically developed early. His game was ahead of the curve early, and he kind of flatlined from his sophomore year to his senior year. And that's where guys started to pass him up. 24/7 thought a lot of guys passed him up. I don't agree with him being that low necessarily. I don't agree with him being as high as I've seen, just because of the fact that offensively, I would have liked to have seen a lot more progression for him. He's great at finishing around the rim. He can be really creative. He can be a pretty good initiator on offense. He handles the ball well. He moves very well. But the jump shot is inconsistent at best, and that's an odd fit coming into Alabama, but obviously the staff believes in the potential to develop it. And when I watch it, the form isn't bad. It's not at all. There's some wasted movement. He's come set inconsistently at times, and that's the key in jump shooting, is you can have a wacky ass form as long as it's consistent enough. That's what matters, is the ability to repeat said motion. His motion is repeatable. He just doesn't repeat it all that much. So with Chris Parker, he's going to be a really weird high variance guy this year. Get more into him later. And then Mo Diabate, he's a guy that the Alabama staff I know was higher on than recruiting services were. I know that for a fact. He was a dude that was super high on Alabama's board, and they pressed really hard for him. And he reminds them a ton of Herb Jones. Granted, it's going to take years in the system for him to get to the Herb Jones level on the offensive side of the ball, of being kind of a point forward, a dude that could run the offense. But defensively, Mo Diabate has all of the potential in the world to be an all SEC caliber defender over his tenure in Tuscaloosa. Obviously, being a true freshman, missing a decent portion at least of the offseason program is going to hurt. He's a guy that may come on later if he comes on at all, just because of the injury kind of biting him early. But I'm really high on the future potential of Mo Diabate, especially on the defensive end of the floor, as a rebounding guy, as a hustle stats guy, as a guy that the stat sheet's just not going to give you a full appreciation for. I am nervous about offensively if he can contribute anything right now, and how much he can contribute down the line. That will be the ultimate question as far as what Mo Diabate can become. Is offensively, can you make him into anything? and that's where the question lies. And then as far as the bigs on the roster, Nick Pringle is where you got to start. He's a senior. He's 6'9". Dude can jump out of the gym. Junior college transfer from last year. Played limited minutes, but you can see the potential of Nick Pringle and the pure electricity that he can bring to the court. There's not many centers in the country with the vertical he has. There's not many dudes in the country with the vertical that Nick Pringle has. Defensively last year, he was a bit of a liability. The fouls were aggressive. He fouled an aggressive amount. And this year, the way that Alabama is set up, he is going to be counted on in a much larger role to play minutes at the 5 in the dunker spot for Alabama and to hold up defensively. The fouls have to come down a great amount for Nick Pringle, but I believe that he can get them in order. The loss of Charles Bediako really threw this team for a loop whenever he decided he was going to stay in the draft at the tail end, whenever everyone in town and around the program was anticipating a return of Charles Bediako. Things got dire. And when things got dire, Nate Oates went to work. And the last two guys that we've brought in the transfer portal, Grant Nelson, a senior, 6'10", the unicorn from North Dakota State, a guy that was in the draft for the longest time, could have legitimately stayed in, but decided to return to college basketball, head to a high major, head to a system that he thought would be best for his future in the NBA to really showcase his abilities to NBA scouts. And what a huge get late in the process for Alabama. What a massive get. Measured in with the exact same measurables as Charles Bediako as far as weight, height, wingspan. So the potential to retain that length is there. Obviously, he's not the rim defender that Charles Bediako was. There's not many dudes in college basketball this year that will be the rim defender that Charles Bediako was. That is the entire reason he stayed in the draft, is because some team or another told him, hey, here's a two-way deal that we're guaranteeing you that we will sign you to no matter what, because we like what you can potentially become as a guy that is a defensive ace that just erases the rim. But Grant Nelson, a 5% block rate at North Dakota State. Obviously, I expect that number to come down a little bit, transferring to a high major, but he does have that potential. I'm not sure exactly how well he moves in space defensively. Offensively, he moves in space pretty well and gets to his spots. He made an all-defensive team in the Big Sky Conference last year, but it was mostly block numbers that got him there. I'm just not sure how switchable Grant Nelson is. It's just tough to really scout that against the competition level he faced. But bare minimum, he's another guy that defensively can plug in as the drop coverage guy that Alabama used a ton last year with Charlie Henry as the defensive assistant. That was a hallmark of his, was playing really extreme drop coverage with Bediako and Clowney. And Grant Nelson can fill that role while offensively offering a ton of dynamicism. That it was his calling card getting into the NBA Combine, getting into the looks from the draft, was what can this dude potentially become on the offensive end of the floor. The potential is limitless. He's shown flashes of being able to put it on the deck, drive, show some legitimate point forward skills, shoot it from deep, and dude can run the rim. Let's get that out of the way. There are going to be some dunks that Grant Nelson throws down this year that will blow the roof off of Coleman Coliseum. He is a very, very intriguing player to watch. And the second piece that Alabama got, which they haven't officially gotten at the recording of this video, is Jaren Stevenson. He's a 6'10" reclassification transfer, reclassification freshman from North Carolina, a top 15-ish player in the 2024 class. I'm recording this video in anticipation of the announcement. It seems like everyone thinks it's heading this way. I'm jumping the gun. If I'm wrong and I have to re-record this entire episode, or I have to delay getting it out further because we're waiting to figure out what the front court situation is going to look like, I'm going to be so mad. But I think that I'm confident enough in saying this, that Jaren Stevenson will be in Crimson. And he's a guy that measurables, hell, even like the dude looks like Noah Clowney, but he's 6'10", 200 pounds. That's the exact measurables that Noah Clowney weighed in at the NBA Combine with. So it's really hard not to look at him, look at his tape, look at what has been written up about him by scouts, and not think Noah Clowney. And I'll get more into it later, but this seems to be the 12 that Alabama's going to roll with. 13 is your scholarship count in college athletics, but the 13th is just going to be really hard to fill. Last year, Alabama didn't fill it, held it open for a reclassification in Davin Cosby Jr. in the winter term. I think that'll once again be what Alabama does. The main option on the table, the popular theory, is that it is going to be Aiden Sherrill when the time comes. A top 10 center recruit who could legitimately come in and not take the red shirt and contribute in the front court rotation early. But that's so far down the line, I don't even want to potentially get into that now. But looking at where things stand currently, I've got a little bit of a minutes projection lined up. I think I've got things capped at about 25 minutes for every guy. I think that the starting lineup, if it was me that drew it up, I would have Javon Quinterly at the point, Aaron Estrada at the 2, Rylan Griffin at the 3, Jaron Stevenson starting at the 4, and Grant Nelson starting at the 5. I don't think that Grant Nelson will see the most minutes at the 5. I think Nick Pringle will. I've got Nelson at 15 minutes at the 5, Pringle at 20. I've got Stevenson at 15 minutes at the 4 and 5 minutes at the 5. And that nails out that 40 minutes at the 5. Nelson gives you 15, Pringle gives you 20, and Stevenson gives you 5. Obviously, those numbers will flex a lot depending on foul trouble, depending on the flow of the game, depending on matchups, physicality, whatever have you. And I think that's something this Alabama team will do a lot more than last year's team did. Was there wasn't a ton of matchup ball being played, but I think for this year's team, especially towards the end of the rotation, there's a lot of guys that could see 20 minutes and then see like 5 or a DNP game to game. Like, let's say theoretically, Alabama is going to take, God, not another road trip to Como. Please, God, not another road trip to Como. I hate playing there. But let's say theoretically, Alabama has Missouri on a midweek and Mississippi State on a Saturday. I think that you could see a guy like Sam Walters play 20 minutes, if not more, against a Missouri, where the game is going to come to running the court, getting as many shots up as possible, and it's going to be a track meet. And then against a team like Mississippi State, where it's going to be a grinded out, we're going to, lock ourselves in a phone book, and we're just going to throw punches and throw rocks. He could legitimately play none, just because the physicality of that game isn't his style. You could see a guy like Mo Diabate take on a lot more of those minutes. You could see Jaron Stevenson take on more minutes, just because of the fact that that's the style of play. And I think that Alabama this year will be able to match different styles of play a lot more than they were this past year, where Alabama needed to dictate the style of play. Granted, Alabama beat a lot of teams in a lot of different ways. You could turn it into a slugfest like Mississippi State does, and Alabama beat Mississippi State 3 times. The only true slugfest that Alabama lost in the regular season were Texas A&M to end the regular season and Tennessee in the middle of the regular season. Tennessee was a road trip to Knoxville. It was a close game, and it was Alabama's worst game, truly. And it came from turnovers more than anything. And then, obviously, the San Diego State game at the end of the year. That one still hurts. That one still hurts a lot. But, obviously that Texas A&M game, Alabama had already wrapped up the SEC regular season title, was already in line for a 1 seed, if not the number 1 overall seed, already had that locked in. So that Texas A&M game at the end of the regular season didn't mean anything. Alabama wasn't playing for anything. So I'm not surprised that Alabama went to Texas A&M and lost that game. Everyone that I talked to anticipated that we would lose that game. But all of that tangent to really say is I think Alabama can mix a lot of things up this year. can do a lot of different things, especially if guys like Sam Walters, Chris Parker, and you know Latrell Wrightsell are really ready to go. Latrell Wrightsell is one of the real wild cards here. He was the 101st ranked transfer by 24/7. He went unranked by On3, which I just don't agree with. But I know so much that this is a guy that is going to benefit a great deal from coming to Alabama and playing in this NATO system where he shot 36%. Let me double check that. Yeah, 36% from three last year on 6 opportunities a game, and a lot of those came off of the dribble. He also chucked up a lot of shots from the mid range and just, was a pretty inefficient scorer at times, but overall, he, retained a 49% effective field goal percentage, so he wasn't at all that inefficient, but I could see an efficiency boost from Latrell Wrightsell coming to Alabama, where those 6 attempts, he's not getting that many. He's not playing that many minutes here. Just no one in the backcourt is really going to be playing that amount of minutes in that amount of usage just because of the sheer talent that's in the backcourt here in Tuscaloosa. But when you look at the shots that he did have to take, mostly coming off the dribble, mostly coming unassisted, that's just not how the system in Alabama works. Most of your 3-point opportunities are going to come off of the drive and the kick, or they're going to come off of an assisted screen, essentially. And it's not at all unreasonable to anticipate that Latrell Wrightsell, who shot 36% on high volume and off the dribble, unassisted threes, could be a 40%, 3-point shooter here in Tuscaloosa, where he's taking fewer, not having to be the guy, and just gets to worry about getting his best looks from his best spots, coming off of the assist and coming off of the spacing that is really going to be provided here. And I think that is going to be a really intriguing point of the season here in Tuscaloosa, is the potential to return to a lot of 5-out basketball that was played in 2020 and 2021. That 2020-2021 season is what I mean, where it was, Herb Jones, John Petty, Josh Primo. You had Jordan Bruner and Alex Reese down at the 5. You had Javon Quinterly still in town. That was a fun team. I really loved that team. But a big key to the success of that team, and where it kind of things went south at the end, and the reason why UCLA was able to pull that game out, was Alabama didn't really have 100% from Jordan Bruner down at the end. And with what Jordan Bruner and Alex Reese did, both rotating in at the 5, was Alabama played 5-out a ton. Jordan Bruner was working the offense from the top of the key. We were able to have screens coming off and him fading to the 3-point line and play 5-out and really space the floor. And that's what Grant Nelson will do. Obviously, he was only 27.2% from 3 last year, which admittedly is not great. You don't want that guy taking a ton of threes, but that's enough from a 5 to make your opposing big man come out. Because in the NATO's offense, Grant Nelson's going to get the green light. Grant Nelson is going to shoot the 3. And that's part of the reason he came here, was to improve upon his 3-point shooting. And you have to bring your big out. You're going to have to space the floor with Alabama if they have Grant Nelson down at the 5. And the pure spacing that could be on this team could be as good as we've seen in college basketball. If you look at a potential lineup, of Grant Nelson, Rylan Griffin with his growth spurt, he could play the 4. Jaron Stevenson, he has the potential to shoot. He's, kind of like a Noah Clowney-esque shooter, where it's the more of the thought of the jump shot that exists, not the consistency in the jump shot that exists. But you have Sam Walters, you have the potentially Rylan Griffin, you have potentially Chris Parker, who can all play the 4, and they can really shoot the hell out of the ball, is in regards to what a 4 traditionally does. And you could really space the hell out of the floor. You throw Aaron Estrada out there, who last year, he was a 36% 3-point shooter. You throw Mark Sears out there, who last year, even despite the terrible slump at the end, he was a 35% 3-point shooter. You throw Latrell Wrightsell, you throw Javon Quinterly, both mid-30s 3-point shooters. you can really space this floor, and it will be really fun to watch. And going back to what I was originally saying with the kind of dynamicism that could be and the matchup potential that could be, I think really what decides that, like I said with Walters, Wrightsell, and Parker, I think Parker could be the X factor here. And I don't want to say he will be, but last year, we were talking about Noah Clowney when I was doing these projections. Obviously, I wasn't, voicing them in this kind of format, but writing them down, talking with my friends, posting on message boards. And the consensus among everyone was that Noah Clowney was a guy that would play sparingly. That, you know, we shouldn't expect much. And that, whatever we get will be a pleasant surprise. And then he kind of came in and blew everyone away. I'm not saying that Chris Parker will do this. I'm not saying that that's what he will do, but obviously there are the physical tools there for Chris Parker. Chris Parker has flashed the potential. Chris Parker has shown what he can be at times, and the ceiling on Chris Parker is absurd. So if he comes in and has a really great offseason, we could look at a team that on paper right now, at least what you have, is, you know, 8, 9 guys that are going to be really, really good. And if Stevenson's ready, if Walters is ready, if Chris Parker is ready, defensively, Mo Diabate will be ready. Offensively, he won't. But you can use that in matchups. You could potentially be looking at the deepest team in college basketball. Right now, I don't think it's really out there to say that Alabama's got the deepest backcourt in college basketball. No one's touting out, Javon Quinterly, a 6-year senior who's been the SEC Tournament Player of the Year, the SEC Tournament MVP, the SEC Sixth Man of the Year, a McDonald's All-American, leading the offense. And you also pair him with a guy like Aaron Estrada, who is coming off of back-to-back CAA Player of the Year wins. He's another fifth-year guy. You have a fourth-year guy in Mark Sears, who was, first-team all-conference in the MAC, and then just had a great year in his first year in the SEC. You can reasonably expect improvements in his second year in the SEC. And then you also have Rylan Griffin, who was a dynamic top 50 scoring guard. And you also have Latrell Wrightsell, who was all-conference before he transferred, and he's a senior. I mean, there is a ton of talent in this Alabama backcourt. It's very reminiscent of Miami last year, where they had just a ton of guards. They were going to constantly put pressure on you. And yeah, they didn't have many bigs. They had really one good big, and that was that. But that didn't matter because they just outscored you. The guards were good enough defensively, and they had a big man who didn't get into a ton of foul trouble, and it really worked out for them. Alabama, I think this year the ceiling of this team is high as really last year, if not higher, when you look at the potential of the entire roster. I mean, obviously, there's not a Brandon Miller on this roster. There's not a guy that he's coming in, he's scoring 19, he's the SEC Player of the Year. You're not going to find that on this roster. We simply don't have that guy in Tuscaloosa this year. But this could be a real sum of the parts team where there's just a ton of really good old dudes on this team. I mean, the youth and the combination of both the youth and the old leadership is incredible. I think it's clear that Nate Oates saw that, yeah, he got beat by a really veteran. And in his response was, I'm going to go get old dudes. When you look at this roster, there's only one true sophomore. There are the freshmen that came in, and then there's Javon Quinterly, who's a grad, Aaron Estrada, who's a grad, and then you have Mark Sears, who's a senior, Latrell Wrightsell, who's a senior, Nick Pringle, who's a senior, Grant Nelson, who is a senior. I mean, you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys who are seniors or graduated already that are on this roster. That's half of the roster. This is one of the most experienced rosters in college basketball, while at the same time having, you know, not five true freshmen. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 true freshmen, a redshirt freshman and a sophomore. Obviously, your freshman, one's a reclass guy, but he's not coming in as a young 17-year-old. He's coming in to potentially be a one and done. A guy like G.G. Jackson, who was old enough to get drafted, one of the younger guys in college basketball, but he's not playing, as a 17-year-old. That's not going to be what he's doing. But, you know, the blend of youth and experience on this roster is clear and intentional, and I think it could really, really benefit this team. And, speaking of the one and only true sophomore, Rylan Griffin, I think he is the potential closest to get to a Brandon Miller type scorer along the wing. Obviously, Grant Nelson came in to be pitched as a number one option here in Tuscaloosa. He will be given his opportunities to score. He will be given volume to score, and I'm not contesting that at all. But when you look at a true wing who could be a really dynamic scorer, I mean, Rylan Griffin just flashed a ton last year. You look at some of the stuff that he did, it was just ridiculous. And you would think to yourself, how is this dude not playing more? And then you would see why he's not playing more, because he was a really inconsistent freshman. He couldn't hit a lick from the corner. Just atrociously bad corner three-point shooting. And that's what the role that we needed him to play, with Brandon Miller really dominating the wing. But Rylan Griffin, when you look at his shot chart, excelled shooting from the wing. So without Brandon Miller here to dominate that wing, it's very reasonable to expect that Rylan Griffin gets to play in a spot that he is much more comfortable and familiar in, and can produce much more, especially with the buzz, coming from Jonathan Givnoy, from all of these media dudes that have seen him work out this offseason, that are, legitimately saying this guy is a legitimate 2024 draft prospect. Just from off-season workouts, the growth spurt that he's hit, and everything, that everyone said about him coming out of high school. This is a 3-level scorer. This dude is going to put the ball in the hoop. It's very reasonable to expect that Rylan Griffin could take a huge step forward with a much more defined role, the potential to be much more comfortable in the offense, because he was a great defender last year. I mean, look at the Auburn game on the road, where Wendell Green was kind of just having his way, and we put Rylan Griffin on him down at the end, and Rylan Griffin iced him out. It was incredible watching Rylan Griffin go to work on the defensive end of the court there. He is a potential elite defender. He really and truly is. If he is locked in with his length and his size and his kind of just athleticism, he could be an incredible defender at this level. Not to mention the offensive potential, but he's got to be locked in. He's got to take smart shots. He has really got to take smart shots. Rylan Griffin is a dude that has never met a shot he doesn't like. But if he can be, a very selective, not very selective, but a selective shot taker, only take what's open, let the offense come to him, not force the issue. And I think that part of his issue last year in playing, limited minutes as a freshman and trying to prove yourself is you do force the issue. You do know that you have to make the most of limited opportunities, and to expect that mentally he will be in a much better position to succeed, because he knows he won't have to force the issue this year, that we are going to believe in him. We are going to give him a bigger role, that he can be a bit more selective. He can let the offense come to him, and he doesn't need to be so worried with forcing his numbers to be there. Obviously, I think the potential for Rylan Griffin is sky high. I'm really all in on him, and I think that he can do a lot for this Alabama team. And the other guy that's, a really big thing that I'd say, I said I'd get back to it later, is Jaron Stevenson. Many in the North Carolina fan base, with, the word being that he's going to reclass and he's going to come to Alabama, have really changed their narrative in a coping mechanism of, he's not ready. This is going to go badly. He's just going to transfer to North Carolina next year. And while I do think, yes, he's absolutely a raw prospect. He absolutely is. Would he be ready if he reclassified this year and went to North Carolina in the class of 2023? No. But he will be here. And let me explain why that is. Because North Carolina expects their bigs to be more post-oriented, to be able to run a more set offense to be able to run these sets and be strong screeners, strong defenders, and guys that are offensively mature. You look at Armando Bacot. He's a mature offensive player that's been around college basketball for a long time. And that's just not what Jaren Stevenson is, but that's not what Alabama wants Jaren Stevenson to be. In the Alabama offense, Noah Clowney, I went back and really dug into this because the comparison is really strong, and I don't want to level the expectations of being a potential, just fringe lottery guy on Jaren Stevenson as a reclassification guy. But what he's going to be asked to do doesn't require him to be polished, doesn't require him to be a finished product by any stretch of the imagination, because offensively, I think he's a bit more natural than Noah Clowney at this stage. He takes the ball up the court a lot at the high school and AAU and shoe league circuit level, and he's very comfortable with it. And he can take over games when he wants to, but he's a bit more passive. But offensively, I think he really is truly ahead of Noah Clowney at this stage. But we're not going to ask him to do all that much, because all Noah Clowney was asked to do offensively here at Alabama was screen, roll, or screen and fade. And then if you didn't like what you had at the perimeter off of a screen and fade, see if you can beat your man to the hole. And if you can't, pass out to a guard and have them reset the possession. Or, clean up misses on the glass, go back up with them. That was what Noah Clowney did offensively at Alabama. He was scoring off of rebounds, scoring in transition, scoring off of the pick and roll, or scoring off of a pick and pop. These aren't complicated things to do offensively. These don't require you to have a very mature offensive game. They don't require you to be this polished player. They require you to just, be able to finish at the rim, use your size, and use a jump shot if you have it. And while Jaren Stevenson doesn't have a 40% jump shot, he's got a respectable one. And Noah Clowney shot sub 30%, but that was good enough for what Alabama needed from him, because all Alabama needed from Noah Clowney as a jump shooter was to make his big, his defender, respect him enough to come out to the perimeter and guard him. And that opened up the spacing. Alabama needed Noah Clowney to shoot for spacing purposes, not for making purposes. And I think that Jaren Stevenson can do all of those things. Obviously, Noah Clowney, great defender. And I don't want to say that Jaren Stevenson will be just as good, but you look at Noah Clowney's numbers, he averaged less than a block a game. And most of those blocks came from chasing down or on help defense. Not many of them came from true just being a rim protector. In the chase downs and the coming over on help, that just requires athleticism, length, and instinct. And there's nothing to say that Jaren Stevenson can't do just that. That he can provide what essentially Noah Clowney did in his year at Alabama, which was a proof of concept for the NBA. A proof of, this is the idea of Noah Clowney. This is the potential of Noah Clowney. Do you want it? Is a really young guy, is a really projectable guy, a guy that fits what the NBA wants out of their bigs to become. That is exactly what Jaren Stevenson can do. And while I agree, yes, he wouldn't be ready at North Carolina this year, but he does exactly what Alabama would need him to do already. It's not going to take, some Herculean effort for him to develop way more than he's really done at this stage over the course of this summer for him to be ready to play in Tuscaloosa this year. It's just going to take him adjusting to the speed of the game, which obviously that's a lot for every, freshman that comes in. But we're not going to be asking him to do something he hasn't done. Something that just requires a level of maturity that he doesn't have. And I think from that standpoint, I believe in Jaren Stevenson as a reclassification freshman. He's not going to be asked to be G.G. Jackson at South Carolina this last year, where he was, the only offensive creator that they had on a bad team. He's going to be asked to be a complementary piece. the fourth or fifth guy on the floor in terms of what is expected in terms of scoring output. He's not going to be expected to lead an offense, to be a, you know, critical, box score guy. Because that's not even what Noah Clowney was, supposed to be. He was a single digit point per game scorer. Obviously, he rebounded very well to the point where he was, nearly looking at a double double. But, you know, that's that's just extra. And that's where I really want to hammer home. I think Jaren Stevenson will do just fine. Just allow his athleticism to carry him on defense. Just stay in solid enough positioning. Don't be a liability, which he isn't. And to just do what he already does on offense. Not to develop this extra skill that he doesn't have. So I think that's where I'll be wrapping things up today. I think Alabama right now, looking at this roster with the additions of Jaren Stevenson and Grant Nelson, is top 15 in my mind. When I look at college basketball, this is a top 15-ish team. And I think that, if guys come along, especially later in the year, whenever freshmen like Sam Walters or freshmen like Chris Parker or Mohamed Diabate or Jaren Stevenson become much more comfortable and they've really adjusted to college basketball, this team could legitimately be a top 5, top 10 team in the country and be right there for the SEC and be right there for another like number 1 seed, number 2 seed and make a run in March. This is really an incredible job that Nate Oates has done in this offseason after losing, your best player that has ever stepped foot in Coleman Coliseum. Another guy that was a freshman that you coming into the season didn't expect to lose, but turned himself into a first rounder. And then at the tail end, you get blindsided and you kind of lose your rim protector that you had really passed on a lot of options in the front court leading up to this because you had anticipated Charles Bediako would return. And then to kind of just fill that plug, like you plug that hole with Grant Nelson and Jaren Stevenson, is incredible. Incredible work. I mean, Alabama's season was already in a make or break situation before basketball even started being played after the departure of Charles Bediako. And Nate Oates kept it alive. And honest to God, may have improved the roster overall in the process. So I'm very, very excited to see what Alabama basketball in the 23-24 season looks like. I'll, be back later on in the summer, especially as we get closer to season tipping off. We get more reports out of practices. We see more, there's some open gym stuff and really see how this team's coming along. But right now, today, I'm very excited for the future of Alabama basketball. I'm very enthralled to see what could potentially come, what we could potentially see in Coleman Coliseum, and another potentially really special team. So if you got any comments, any questions, any things that you feel that you didn't hear answered, or questions that you may have had that just I didn't bring up, or really any thoughts that kind of differ from me as far as where this roster is, where a certain player is in your mind, shoot away. Like, I'd love to hear them. I'd love to have that discussion. And I just want to see, how much excitement can, kind of be sustained for Alabama basketball over the course of the summer as we get, closer to a finalized roster and the idea of what this team's really going to be like. So, without any further ramblings, thank you for listening, especially if you made it this far. Have a great rest of your day and rest of your time until I see you again and you get to hear my ramblings.